Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni meets with French President Emmanuel Macron and Slovakia's Robert Fico, with Ukraine war topping the discussions.
German police are conducting searches in Algarve for traces of Madeleine McCann as they look for evidence to support charges against Christian Bruckner.
Dutch Prime Minister Dick Schoof has resigned, just hours after Geert Wilders pulled his party out of government.
Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has held talks with the leaders of France and Slovakia in Rome, with the war in Ukraine and a lasting peace deal for the country topping the agenda. Meloni first received Slovakia's Prime Minister Robert Fico, who arrived at her official residence late Tuesday afternoon. According to a joint government statement, Fico and Meloni discussed their support for peace in Ukraine and their commitment to the reconstruction of the country. Later on Tuesday, Meloni welcomed France's Emmanuel Macron for talks that covered Ukraine, Gaza, and relations with the EU and the Trump administration. Italy's government said that both countries have common positions on many issues and expectations were high for productive talks. But the leaders' opinions don't align on all issues. There have been differences of position regarding military support for Ukraine, with Macron suggesting sending troops to the country while Meloni ruling it out.
Denmark has officially quit the Frugal Four to focus on rearmament. Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen has announced. Denmark joined the so-called Frugal Four during the 2020 negotiations on the EU budget. The group of fiscally conservative countries also included the Netherlands, Austria and Sweden. But as the new budget talks approach, Copenhagen wants to switch sides.
As Danes, we will always be tough in the negotiations on the budget. We don't want money to be spent on nothing that is not necessary for Europe. So we will be tough, but being a part of the Frugal Four is no longer the right place for us.
From now on, Denmark will have a more flexible attitude towards the common EU budget, Frederiksen said, insisting defense spending should take precedence over all other priorities.
For me, the most important thing is to rearm Europe. That's my starting point and that's my conclusion in all discussions. Because if Europe is not able to protect ourselves and to defend ourselves, then it's game over at some point.
Denmark isn't the only one with a change of mindset. Sweden and Finland have also softened their positions, calling for fresh money to boost deterrence capabilities against Russia. The European Commission is expected to present the draft budget before the summer break. Once the proposal is on the table, the political debate will begin in full swing.
Two years after the last searches in Portugal in connection with the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, German authorities have returned to the city of Lagos in the southern Algarve region to try and find any trace that might help the investigation. The search, which has the support of Portuguese authorities, began on Tuesday and will continue until the 6th of June. Various locations will be swept in the search for evidence that will help support the case against Christian Bruckner. German authorities declared Bruckner to be the main suspect behind the child's abduction, although he's yet to be formally charged. The search warrant was issued by the Braunschweig Public Prosecutor's Office. They're conducting preliminary proceedings against the German who's currently in prison for the rape of an elderly woman in 2005. Without new charges, Bruckner could be a free man as early as September. The search will focus on an area between Praia de Luz and one of the houses where Bruckner lived at the time of Maddie's disappearance. Maddie McCann was reported missing in May 2007 while on vacation with her family.
Dutch Prime Minister Dick Schoof has resigned from his position just hours after far-right politician Geert Wilders announced his Party for Freedom would pull out of the ruling government coalition. Schoof is expected to submit the cabinet's resignation to King Willem-Alexander by the end of the day on Tuesday, but says the coalition will remain as a caretaker government up until the new election.
In de ministerraad hebben we gesproken over de ontstane situatie. geconcludeerd dat met het vertrek van de PVV onvoldoende draagvlak is in de Tweede Kamer voor dit kabinet.
It comes after a turbulent day in Dutch politics, with Wilders declaring his withdrawal from government following the coalition's refusal to accept his immigration policy. Wilders' 10-point plan, which he presented last Monday, called for a complete halt to asylum, a temporary stop to family reunions for asylum seekers with refugee status, and the return of all Syrians who have applied for asylum or are in the Netherlands on temporary visas. The Dutch government is now teetering on the brink of collapse, paving the way for snap elections in the Western European nation.
Premier Donald Tusk po przegranej swojego kandydata na prezydenta Rafała Trzaskowskiego ogłosił, że zwróci się do Sejmu o wotum zaufania dla swojego rządu. Wniosek ma zostać rozpatrzony na dodatkowym posiedzeniu Sejmu, które odbędzie się 11 czerwca. Choć sam Donald Tusk jest dziś wielkim nieobecnym w Sejmie, wotum zaufania jest tutaj tematem numer 1. Wysłuchaliśmy opinii polityków kilku frakcji. Większość koalicjantów odczytuje to jako symboliczny ruch premiera i zapowiedziało, że zagłosuje za udzieleniem wotum.
Oczywiście, że zagłosuję za. Skoro taką decyzję podjął premier i uznał, że rząd potrzebuje takiego jednoznacznego potwierdzenia wotum zaufania, potwierdzenia większości w Sejmie, znaczy po prostu tak jest.
My oczywiście poprzemy Donalda Tuska w tym wotum, bo koalicja ma trwać i trwać będzie.
Inni parlamentarzyści, zwłaszcza ci z prawej strony, kategorycznie podkreślali, że będą głosować przeciw.
Koalicjanci Tuska wiedzą, że nie muszą wybierać pomiędzy Tuskiem a Armagedonem. Mogą dzisiaj wybierać inne warianty i oczywiście tych wariantów jest kilka. Jednym z nich jest rząd techniczny czy rząd ekspercki, tak jak wczoraj sformułował to pan prezes Jarosław Kaczyński.
Można mówić, że to jest właśnie odbudowa państwa, a poza tym oczywiście sprawy gospodarcze, sprawa kryzysu finansów publicznych, sprawa służby zdrowia, sprawa bezpieczeństwa, powrót do zbrojenia, bo przecież to zostało w istocie zahamowane, polityka zagraniczna, relacje ze Stanami Zjednoczonymi, ale także te sprawy europejskie.
Wybory prezydenckie w Polsce zadziałały niczym referendum w sprawie skuteczności rządu. Koalicja musi wyciągnąć wnioski i ustawić agendę programową na najbliższe 2,5 roku. Opozycja będzie regularnie domagała się wymiany premiera, a w kuluarach mówi się, że kohabitacja rządu z Karolem Nawrockim może okazać się trudniejsza niż z obecnym prezydentem Andrzejem Dudą. Z Warszawy dla Euronews Aleksandra Gałkareczko.
At least 5 people were killed and several others were injured in an attack on an aid convoy in Sudan's Darfur region. The attack on the 15-truck convoy carrying desperately needed food and supplies happened near the Rapid Support Forces-controlled town of Koma. The convoy was trying to reach the besieged city of El Fasher for the first time in over a year.
This joint WFP-UNICEF convoy was made up of 15 trucks, and it had traveled over 1,800 kilometers from Port Sudan, and they were carrying nutrition supplies and food. The agencies were negotiating access to complete their journey to El Fasher when it was attacked. The route that the convoy was going to take was shared in advance with the parties on the ground who were notified and aware of the location of the trucks.
Duyarj said all those killed and injured were Sudanese contractors working for the World Food Programme and UNICEF. The two warring sides in Sudan, the armed forces and paramilitary group the Rapid Support Forces, traded blame over the attacks. Independent groups, however, tracked fighting in and around El Fasher and blamed the RSF for the attack, accusing the group of misleading the public and evading accountability. Sudan was plunged into war more than 2 years ago when tensions between the army and the RSF reached a boiling point. Violence started with street battles in the capital Khartoum, which quickly spread across the country. South Korea's opposition liberal candidate Lee Jae-myung has won the country's presidential election. The newly elected leader has secured more than 49% of the votes, with his conservative rival Kim Mon-soo trailing behind at approximately 41%. Jae-myung's election effectively ends months of political turmoil triggered by the short-lived imposition of martial law by former President Yoon Suk-yeol.
여러분이 저에게 맡기신 첫 번째 사명 내란을 확실히 극복하고 다시는 국민이 맡긴 총칼로 국민을 겁박하는 군사 쿠데타는 없게 하는 일.
Speaking to supporters shortly after exit polls projected his victory, Jae-myung said his first goal is to reunite the nation.
정치가 이해관계 때문에 다투더라도 정치가 편을 가를지라도 국민은 편을 가를 필요가 없습니다. 국민은 이 나라의 주인이고 정치는 국민들의 삶을 대신 책임지는 일꾼들입니다. 일꾼들이 편을 갈라 싸우는 건 피할 수 없더라도 우리 대한민국 국민들이 편을 갈라 증오하고 혐오할 필요는 없지 않습니까?
The result was not surprising for the conservatives who've been dealt a major blow in popularity amid Suk-yeol's martial law debacle. Hours before the liberal victory was formally announced, Moon-soo conceded defeat in an address to supporters.
국민의 선택을 겸허하게 받아들이겠습니다. 당선되신 이재명 후보님 축하드립니다.
60-year-old Lee Jae-myung inherits a difficult job ahead. The new leader will not only have to address deeply rooted domestic divisions, but also difficult foreign policy. The most pressing challenges facing the new leader are U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs, as well as North Korea's rapidly advancing nuclear program.